In the medical device industry, we are going through a massive transformation, which is led by technology. And yes, we have heard a lot about AI, but I think there is a quiet revolution also going on in the automation space. We know about robotic surgery, but you might have heard about telesurgery, which is remotely controlled. Imagine a surgeon sitting in Florida and controlling surgery somewhere in Africa. This, by the way, happened last July, where the FDA allowed this clinical trial to go on. So I'm very excited about the remotely controlled medical systems, including telesurgery, but let's think about them, right? More than technology, they also introduce a new set of patient safety considerations and factors. We're going to talk about all that with my guest today, Dr. Omar Kalaa. He has been a guest on Let's Talk Risk before. So you might have heard his podcast. If not, I will share a link in the notes below with you. But he is the world known expert in the intersection between medical devices and telecommunications. He is the principal and founder at Innovectrum, a consulting company where he specializes in healthcare connectivity using cutting edge technology in telecommunications. Previously, he was at the US FDA for about 8 years, leading their scientific efforts in developing regulatory tools for advancing innovation in this area. I cannot wait to talk about this topic with Omar. And with that, Omar, how are you today? It's
I'm
good to see
doing
you.
great. It's a pleasure to be here, Nevin. Thank you for having me.
You know, every time I talk to you, I feel so energized. I feel so pumped up about technology because I hear from you a way to get things done, not the barriers, the compliance barrier, the regulatory barrier. I don't hear that from you. I
hmm
hear from you a very optimistic tone, which is careful and measured. But I think you show us a practical way. So I would love to talk to you about this topic. But first, just let's set the stage. What do we
hmm
exactly mean by remotely controlled medical systems? Give us a few examples of these systems.
Sure. I think the highlight in that sentence should be under the word control. So it's not only the reception of measurements or vital signs or messages from the patient to the medical device over a network, but it's the other way around, closing the loop, sending control commands and sending input from the medical device or from the clinician side towards the patient and where the medical device is. So examples of this could be telesurgery, as you have included in your introduction. Telesurgery is when there is a robotic surgical system where the robot is next to the patient, as you can imagine, but the surgeon and the surgeon's console is located in a geographically remote area. And the example that you have mentioned is spot on. This was the first FDA approved IDE, investigational device exemption, so a clinical trial, where the surgeon was in Orlando and the patient was in Luanda, Angola. And yeah, like you can imagine how exciting that must have been for the surgeon, being a pioneer in this study. And the outcomes were excellent. I believe there will be a publication coming out from the team shortly describing the entire study and providing details for the broader community. Another example that comes to mind is the use of infusion pumps. And there is a very active community working on this under the Smart and Autonomous Medical Systems, which is a collaborative community of which the FDA is a part of. The acronym for it is SAMS, SAAMS. Just feel free to Google it. You'll find a lot of interesting information there. So the concept there, imagine maybe a cancer patient receiving chemotherapy, but at home instead of at the hospital. And some forms of this use case exist today. But in those examples, the infusion pump is pre-programmed and it becomes a closed rigid system. If you evolve that use case, you could introduce the clinician oversight from the hospital to the infusion pump that is available next to the patient, which would allow that form of closed loop control in which also you can integrate things like vital signs monitors. And this use case introduces a whole different set of challenges compared to telesurgery. Telesurgery, you can think of a vertically integrated system. You have one platform from one company, everything is under the same roof. In infusion pumps, you have probably an infusion pump from manufacturer X, a vital signs monitor from manufacturer Y, and maybe there is an algorithm developed by a software company
Mhm.
introducing smart logic. So
Mhm.
the interoperability between these items introduce its own set of challenges and risks, which I'm sure is a topic you are passionate about.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But I think that the term remote doesn't mean that the distance has to be too long, too large. It could be
Absolutely
in the
have not.
same
No.
room. I'm thinking like, someone who has a
Mhm.
insulin pump
Mhm.
and they have an app and they can control the insulin delivery. It's
Correct.
also remote. It's not directly controlled.
Absolutely.
So, or maybe you have a neurostimulator implanted and you can upload its latest features or
Mhm.
controls or download data. Am I
Absolutely.
thinking the right way? Like, I think we should have a broad understanding of remotely controlled systems.
I think so. Without splitting hairs on the specific semantics, I tend to think of the examples you mentioned as broader connected medical systems because these are systems that use some form of telecommunication to move data from point A to point B. The vast majority of those systems tend to move data, or the more important path of data is in one direction. So it moves information from point A to point B, where that information simply sits. The lower percentage includes control signals, as you have introduced, includes uploads. So for an implant, for example, upload a new set of parameters, a new set of configurations, firmware updates in some cases to counter a cybersecurity threat. Until today, to the best of my experience, these applications remain in the minority of applications. The
Mhm.
majority of applications on the market tend to move data in one direction. For the remotely controlled systems, the more important path for data is that of control. So
Mhm.
you're actively controlling the device, you're influencing how the device is delivering its intended function from a distance. And that distance, I 100% agree with you. It doesn't have to be thousands of kilometers.
Mhm.
The mere separation of that functionality, that user interface from the device itself to somewhere else requires the designer to introduce an electronic data interface, an EDI to the device. It requires the designer to think, how am I going to encode the data that goes over that interface? What protocol am I going to use? Who will be the consumer of my data? How would they understand what I intended to say when I said this parameter value is X? So
Mhm.
all of that thought process is basically the same across these remotely controlled systems. You have to establish methods of communication. And then once you take a step further down the design chain, you start to think, okay, I realize how my system works. What kind of connectivity modality is fit for purpose for my
Mhm.
particular use case? Is
Mhm.
it Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Ethernet, fiber, 5G? Like there is a ton of examples out there, and each of them introduces advantages and in some
Mhm.
cases might be completely inappropriate. The starting step is just like any other medical device, is to understand what exactly are we trying to do, how are we going to help the patient, what is the intended use of the device,
Mhm.
and how it's going to deliver it.
So, Omar, let's think about the big picture here first. Of course, we get excited about technology. We are all engineers. But what do you think is driving this interest and adoption of remotely controlled medical systems?
Yes, this is exactly where we should start the discussion, Naveen. I believe access to healthcare is at the very core of this evolution in remotely controlled medical systems. So think about telesurgery, for example. There is a significant disparity in the availability of surgical care in different parts of the world. So for the trial that we were just discussing, the one that happened between Orlando and Angola, the balance of patients being able to access qualified surgical care is just mind blowing, to be honest. Back in February, just 2 months ago, I had the privilege of co-chairing a session about connectivity and cybersecurity at the Surgical Robotics Society Telesurgery meeting that also happened in Orlando. And just looking at the breadth of expertise in the audience and the backgrounds of people helps understand why this is important. So you had the World Health Organization in the audience. They spoke multiple times. They highlighted the need for better healthcare access and better surgical access globally. So here in the US, we're focused on the issues with our healthcare system, but these issues can be amplified multiple orders of magnitude when you start to look at the global healthcare system. There were people with economics background looking at how the payers might view access to telesurgery as a part of the big picture of making healthcare available to patients where they need it. There were representatives of patient groups talking about not being able to travel to access that healthcare, even when it's available to them, even if they are in a developed country. Just having the luxury of going through a surgery that you need, which might save your life, in a location that is convenient to you as a patient is a huge advantage. Access to healthcare, I think that really underpins the whole evolution of remotely controlled
Mhm.
medical systems. The same logic can be applied to infusion pumps, like exactly the example that we were just discussing. If you have a cancer patient and they need to receive therapy at home instead of traveling to a distant location, you could simply ship the equipment to them,
Mhm.
and a local nurse could help them install and operate the equipment, and then qualified medical care could happen at a completely different place.
Nice, nice. So I think that this brings into perspective the why access is so important. And all of us who are working in this field, I think, can feel quite good about the contribution we are making to this. So let's now jump into really the risk aspects of it. There are some obvious risks here: connectivity, cybersecurity, and whatnot. Any other factor that comes to your mind which is unique to these systems?
Yes. So connectivity is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and it's often misunderstood. So, for example, if you lose a packet in transmission, then that is something that is easily simulated in a test environment. But then the test should not be really looking into the packet that was lost. It should be looking into what does your device do in that event. So understanding the specific failure modes associated with a given connectivity modality, and then exploring how the design team mitigated the risks associated with those failure modes is often not a trivial task. And there is a serious break in communication in this topic, even though we are talking about telecom. But for example, let me share with you exactly where I'm going with this. Think about latency. What does latency mean to you?
Maybe some delay.
Okay, wonderful. In telecom, latency could mean a number of different things. Are we talking about latency in the radio network, which is what often telecom people refer to in topics like 5G? Or are you talking about the complete round trip latency between the transmitter and the receiver, and then the message going back to the transmitter with a response, which is often what matters in an application like telesurgery? So you get two people, one from a medical device company and another from a telecom company. And if you don't start by setting the expectations that they should exchange terms that they both understand, and they set the ontology of the discussion, they might end up talking about completely separate things.
That's a great point, because this is not just medical science or regulatory stuff or typical science and technology that goes into medical device. It's really truly a cross-functional effort where we have to bring in technical know-how from different disciplines and make sure we are speaking the same language. So, I'm very curious now. Of course, we could go into a lot of details about different failure modes and risks, but I want to take a big picture here. What would the concept of fail-safe mean in a telesurgery environment? How do you think about fail-safe?
Fantastic question. If I may take a step back and start with what is the telesurgery system? From my perspective, it's both the device with all of its components, even though they are geographically separated, in addition to the network. All of that is the system, because you take one piece out of that system and it simply doesn't function, correct? However, the challenge here is, I don't want to say regulatory, but it's in the ownership in those different components. It is common knowledge that FDA does not regulate telecom networks, but if the telecom network is something that the functionality of your device depends on, then you as the designer, without starting to think about FDA, should explore how will my system operate in case that network doesn't do exactly what was promised to me. And this highlights the importance of the partnership between the different stakeholders in that system. Because different components of it are owned by different owners, then if they don't talk to each other, if there is no way for them to identify issues, escalate problems, find resolutions, then at one point something bad will happen and the operators will not know what to do. So this is not the same when you're talking about a medical device, for example, using Bluetooth, and the designer owns the entire system. They own the device, the receiving app, and they control completely the communication method used in that system. When you go over long distance networks, that is simply not the case.
Yeah.
And there are interesting approaches that are emerging on the market to try and address this particular issue. Again, without naming names, there is a startup that is building their own telecom infrastructure that is specifically geared toward remote control of medical application. Most notably, telesurgery. They talk about that a lot. So this is a very interesting approach. They decided that we want to build our own infrastructure, and this is the best way to do this. Is it the only way? No, there are other ways. And I think a healthy market will have different flavors of how the same objective can be achieved. And I think this will only advance the market forward. So going back to the original question of how some of these specific risks and mitigations for remotely controlled medical applications, sometimes finding the answer of what should my device do when a failure mode occurs is not exactly trivial. So in the case of infusion pump, because I think this is more relatable, if you lose connection, should the pump continue with the same medication dosage? Should it reduce the dosage or should it increase the dosage? Well, the answer is it depends. It really depends. What medication are we talking about? What is the state of the patient? Why is the patient going through this therapy? So you need clinical input to understand exactly what are we doing here so that we can build an adequate mitigation strategy for that particular device and use case. Even though the failure mode can appear the same as applied in any other scenario, but how you deal with it will guide you down a completely separate path. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense a lot. And in fact, I love the fact that you have brought the focus back to the intended use and indication. So before we dig further into this fail-safe topic, which because it's very, very interesting to me, let's take another step back and really ask the question, who owns the risk in such a distributed system where control...
I keep asking myself that question, Naveen, believe me.
And the reason I'm asking this question, and together we're going to talk about that, there's no answer right now, but I think it's worth talking about because the whole notion of fail-safe to me will depend upon who owns the risk.
Absolutely.
The notion of fail-safe will be different for different players in the ecosystem of this telesurgery. And when you were describing to me that a startup is developing their own telecommunication network, that was exactly what was going in my head, is that maybe there should be a dedicated network which is only for this purpose and not for any other purpose. But of course, there are any other solutions. So let's talk about that. I mean, even today, let's not even worry about remotely controlled systems, right? Even in today medical devices, the risk is distributed. Who owns the risk is not an easy question to answer because
not at all.
Manufacturers own a certain amount of risk, payers own a certain amount of risk, providers own a certain amount of risk, and patients own a certain amount of risk. So how do we begin to have this conversation about risk ownership? I think it's an important question for us to understand because that will define the space we're going to play and the controls we're going to insert. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Yes. This is the topic that I spend a significant portion of my time contemplating. I think I always have to refer back to my background as an engineer because immediately I start thinking about the different nuts and bolts that I have to put together in order to make this system work. And to me, there is no alternative than to have contracts in place, clarifying those expectations, making very clear the responsibilities of different parties, and allowing this conversation to move forward. I love what you said about your instinct that there needs to be a specific infrastructure for X use case. This is an excellent thought, but in practice, how you implement that can vary significantly. So you can talk to any 5G provider today, okay? They can tell you, well, we can give you that. The 5G network was built to offer exactly this type of approach. And as a matter of fact, 5G is being used for telesurgery in other parts of the world. Is there a one size fits all that is universally applicable? I don't think so. There are many nuances to what works here and what makes sense here. So even if two technologies can offer the same technical functionality and performance, one of them might be cost prohibitive. It might
Absolutely.
be simply unattainable for the end user. One of them might simply not be available where you need it.
Yeah.
So if you are in a rural location, your hands are tied. You
Right.
have to use what's available to you. So again, there are many variables that go in here.
Mhm.
But I wanted to revert back to the concept of contracts. In telecom, there is this construct that is called a service level agreement, where a network provider gives the user a very clear description of what is it that they're going to provide, how are they going to deal with downtime, and they give statistical estimates for how often their network goes down, how long will it take the provider to fix that downtime and bring the network back up. This is a very elaborate and detailed document, and this has been in existence for a very long time. So this is nothing new. I think what can be done here is to make the language in those contracts more accessible to healthcare developers
Mhm.
and establish a way to really translate between telecom jargon and the concepts that medical device manufacturers actually care about to deliver a safe application to their patients. I think bridging that gap will be helpful to everybody. The telecom providers will have more clients and the healthcare community will have more options for service. Hey, this is a win-win in my opinion.
Well, what I'm hearing you say is that if you are a company dreaming to get into this telesurgery space, you have to think broadly, more broadly than just what your core capabilities are. And you have to think about different partners in different ecosystems and figure out
Mm-hmm.
the play field, so as to say, who plays where and what their role and responsibilities, and maybe establish a contractual agreement. I think that's very good
Absolutely.
insight for anybody trying to do this. Now, Omar, I know you are not at FDA anymore, but you worked
Yes.
there for 8 years. And I think
Yes.
you have a good understanding of how the agency thinks about really innovative white spaces where
Mm-hmm.
there is no precedent, there is no rule book, there's no playbook. Share
Yes.
with us some thoughts about how the agency might be thinking about regulating something like telesurgery. What would be some of the key factors they would be considering? Not that you have inside knowledge, but
Mm-hmm.
just let's put on our thinking hat and say,
Yes.
let's put ourselves in FDA's shoes and say when we go to them, we have a awareness of what they might be thinking about.
Absolutely. I think this is a great question. And it might surprise you that my answer is absolutely publicly available. This is nothing different from any other regulated area by FDA. Patient safety is front and center. So the thought process, the entire thought process is how will your system, in this case, because instead of saying a medical device, we're talking about the system and its different components that some of them happen to be medical devices. That's why you're having the conversation with FDA. How will your system be safe to the patient and be effective?
Yeah.
It's the same basics that are applied really anywhere in medical device space. So the points of, I don't want to say friction, the points of ambiguity will touch on the portions that are not owned by the sponsor. So
Mhm.
the medical device manufacturer takes their submission to FDA. They own different parts of the system, but they don't own other parts. Okay. So how will they obtain the evidence that they need to support their argument that their end-to-end system is safe, is effective? And again, you go back, you look, if you have a contract with a supplier to a component in your system, that clearly spells the services provided and how they tie into your broader system design, the consequences of X, Y, and Z happening, and how this can be fed into your risk management plan. I think this makes for a good argument, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But I want to go
Yeah.
a layer deeper into that. And maybe we can draw upon the IDE that was approved by the FDA last year. to the extent that you can talk about it. But if you don't have direct knowledge, maybe we can think about what factors FDA might have considered in allowing them and what safeguards they would have expected for them to implement first before they could proceed with this clinical trial.
Yes, I wish I could share more, but I am not authorized to dive into any details about this. But hey, the people who are behind this trial are publicly known. You may consider reaching out to Dr. Patel, for example, and inviting him to your podcast and asking him to share some of the details. But maybe we can discuss a theoretical example.
Yes, let's do that.
And it doesn't have to be telesurgery. It can be really any remotely connected system because the same concepts apply everywhere. You would need to look at what are the different data streams that constitute your communication path. Okay, so do you need audio and video stream? In telesurgery, you do. In an infusion pump application, probably not. Do you need a command and control data stream? We're talking about remotely controlled devices. So yes, obviously. What other data streams go into your communication path? And then what is the importance for each of these? Imagine you're doing a telesurgery, you lost your audio and video stream with the remote surgical team, but you maintained the video stream from the surgical instrument. Is that the same level of risk as losing all video? Or is that the same level of risk as losing the instrument video and maintaining the AV teleconference with the remote team? So all of these combinations of events have to be thought about. And then again, going back to your favorite topic, identifying the risks associated with these circumstances and planning mitigations for them. The mitigations could be your typical medical device mitigations, raising an alarm or stopping an action or taking a predetermined control into place. Or it can be a more evolved and nuanced mitigation. So you could have a middle layer between your medical device and the telecom provider, whatever that provider might be, okay, that allows the device to speak to the network and say, hey, I'm experiencing this, give me more of that. And the network might provide a response back. And there are multiple approaches that are evolving in that direction, right at the intersection between medical devices or any mission critical application and telecom infrastructure. So then all of this information, all of this evidence need to be packaged in a way that FDA appreciates, which is, again, they're trying to answer like very direct questions.
Yes.
Is it safe? Is it effective? So just throwing random data at FDA reviewers, I don't think it helps anybody.
Yeah.
The sponsor needs to organize their argument in a way that actually gets them to the objective. How do you obtain the evidence is sometimes not as straightforward as you might think. And that's where innovation can happen.
I think we can offer some tangible advice already based on our experience. What I'm hearing you say is that when it comes to things like telesurgery or remotely controlled systems, we have to start thinking about them as systems and maybe systems of systems. So we have to develop a competence in system safety engineering, systems engineering.
Absolutely.
We have to do that, right?
Absolutely. I can't see any way other than this.
Right. The second thing is don't wait until you have gathered all the evidence to go to the FDA. We know you should go to them when you are planning. Go to them in the planning stage, and maybe here is what I'm imagining. You show up to them and say, yeah, it's a great idea, but where is your telecom partner? Bring them with you next time. So think ahead. Think ahead about what you would need in that meeting to communicate the plan to the FDA. So FDA says, yeah, it's a good plan. There's a good chance you will generate evidence that will be acceptable to us. But without that, don't wait until the end. You're going to be probably rejected if you did that. So these are two best practices that we can share already.
Absolutely. And I think these best practices are applicable across the board, Naveen.
Correct.
I have witnessed on many occasions FDA reviewers and review teams helping the sponsor think through some of the problems that they encounter. Like the FDA is staffed with very knowledgeable people, very experienced people. I have nothing but respect for them. And their goal is really the same goal as should be the manufacturers, which is to allow patient access to safe and effective devices. So this might sound like an ad to the FDA, but I don't think the FDA is a barrier here. Go to them, talk to them, show them that you are thinking about this in a serious and structured way. And I can't expect anything other than the FDA trying to help you get your technology right. Or providing you with feedback that advances your objective.
Yes, yes. So let's get into that as our last question today, Omar. We know that FDA as an organization right now is under tremendous amount of stress. There has been chaos leashed on them in the last 2 years. We won't go political here, but we know the reality on the ground. People are under a lot of stress, maybe short-staffed, maybe under-resourced. In the current environment, and maybe in the next 2-3 years from now, what do you recommend people to be mindful of when they approach FDA? How best they can engage with the FDA and maximize the value of their interaction? What can they do? What are some of the two or three key sort of tips you can share with us?
Okay. I think a very basic recommendation for any sponsor is do your homework. Understand the playing field. And this is not saying that you should go look for a predicate because that is very straightforward.
Yes.
I'm saying understand exactly how your ecosystem operates and go to FDA asking them very targeted questions that they can actually answer. So you can again, we both love systems. Think of FDA as a system. You provide it with bad inputs, you're going to get bad outputs.
Correct.
Provide FDA with good inputs, good questions, thoughtful evaluation plans, and they will provide you with constructive feedback. It is the unfortunate reality that not everybody out there does this, even though it's so logical. But sometimes it's not easy to actually implement. So I would say do your homework is at the very basis of a good submission or like a good technology development effort.
Sounds good. That's wonderful. Omar, it has been such a fascinating conversation, and I know we can talk about this a lot, but I just want to share with you like an imagination I have right now, an idea that I'm feeling very excited about. We just know that the Artemis 2 mission was launched.
Yes.
They are still in flight. They're coming back home. But what a historical mission. And
Absolutely.
People are already imagining that we will have a moon base. We'll have people living there doing work, maybe humans and robots together and whatnot. In this context, we are talking about the right thing, telesurgery or remotely controlled medical systems. We might need healthcare on the moon,
Yes.
and we cannot bring them back right away. So let's just broaden our horizons and be excited about what we can do for the advancement of not just our patients and people and consumers that we see today, but humanity as a whole. So I feel particularly thrilled and excited about these developments. And I hope people will take this from our conversation today, is that it's up to us to broaden our horizons and imaginations and think about what we could do and where we could be instead of getting stuck with what we have. So I'll close there, Omar, but I do want to invite you to just help us package all this in 2 or 3 key points today. Let's package our conversation that has been so insightful and sort of free-flowing in different directions. And I want our viewers to take away some 2 or 3 key takeaway points. Help us do that, please.
Yes, I think one of the main takeaways that I would propose is that it is hard to do anything when you're working alone. Medical device manufacturers today, they do not look the same as they did 15 years ago. They evolved into a new type of companies and they need to work with new type of partners, especially when you're venturing into a connected medical system, especially if you have a high risk application like remote control of a medical device. So instead of taking a step back and trying to reinvent the wheel internally, probably it's a good idea to open the doors, invite partners, vet your partners, select who can work best with you, establish a human relationship with those partners because you will have to work with them for a long time. And that will only contribute to the success of your eventual product. So I really think that the way medical devices look today is an evidence of the convergence between these different sectors and these different fields. Like development in telecom has happened for a very long time in a silo. And at this point, there is no alternative for that development but to happen in collaboration with the vertical that the technology intends to serve, which in our case is healthcare. The same can be said about the other way around. Medical device development has happened in a silo for a very long time. You have these established manufacturers, they have their own ecosystems. But today you are at a point where you have reached a position where you either will have to reinvent everything if you want to grow bigger than what you already are, or you extend an arm and shake a few hands, find someone who can help you partner across these different areas for the benefit of all parties. I think I am a fan of open doors policy. I think these different sectors should talk more. They should collaborate. I can only see good things happening if that were to happen more efficiently. And you opened this chat with an observation that I'm usually optimistic, which is something I'm proud of. The reason I'm optimistic here is that when those conversations happen, immediately you will start to see problems identified and points of friction rising to the surface, which is exactly what the community needs. You need to have those conversations. You need to understand what can and what will go wrong so that you can plan around those issues. No one wants for an entire system to be implemented and then a few years down the line you realize, oops, something is out there that we've never thought of. No, you want to do that up front. So you want those conversations to occur very early on.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's exactly what we are trying to do on Let's Talk Risk. And I will say that what you have just mentioned tells me that there is a clue here for all of us, even individuals, as an opportunity because we don't have to know everything. If we know enough to be able to ask the right questions and become a connector with a lot of other people, I think we can make a big difference. So I want to close on that uplifting message. Omar, thank you so much for taking the time and coming to the show to share your thoughts. Please come back again in a year or so when we have some more clarity on this field and we have more understanding. We will go a little bit deeper. But I want to thank you again and wish you all the best in your current venture. I can't wait to see the successes you will have in the coming future and the great things that will come out of you. So thank you once again and all the best.
Of course.